I've created a circular grid container, and I'm going to show you how to make one yourself. Alright, so before we jump into showing you how to make it, I'm going to say I was just thinking about Marvel Rivals and the way their character select works. It was kind of curved. We had a few rows, and that got me thinking. It's kind of like a grid container, but it's curved. So if that were to go all the way around, that would be like a circular grid container. So I started thinking about how could we create one of those. And well, we have one here, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So let's take a look at the settings. We're going to have the ability to set how many rings we want here. And as you see, if we go below, everything breaks because we don't have enough space with everything set up. But let's say we go to 4. I have auto size turned on, so it's automatically going to resize the container itself for you, and that's only going to happen inside the editor. That way it doesn't mess with anything size-wise inside of your game. And of course, if you wanted to be able to resize inside of your game, then you can always change that when we get to the code. You have your ring spacing, which is going to be the space in between of our rings here. So if I change this to 50, you're going to see the rings get much closer together. And if we change that to 200, they're going to be much further apart. And our starting radius, again, it's going to have to do with our middle. So we see our middle point there. It's currently at 60. But if we put that at 100, you can see they're more spread out for the initial ring there. All right. Now we have the number of items per ring. So if we were to increase that, you're going to see them removing from the outer rings and get added to the inner rings. Now, it's important to note that this is the exact number for the middle ring. And then just because it's a circle, it's going to obviously double. So this first ring here has 16 items. The next one will have room for 32, and then 64, 128, 256, and so on. So if we start lowering this, you can see we're getting our third ring back. But remember, we have room for 4 rings. So once we get low enough, we're going to start adding into that 4th ring. And you can see we kind of get some weird shapes going on, depending on your settings at times. All right. And auto size, I already mentioned. That's based off of your ring settings up here that we have up here. So we change this from 4 to 3, and based off of our other settings there, that's automatically resizing there. 2 is going to resize there, but of course that's kind of broken, so we would have to change some of our settings to fit everything in it, but you get the idea. Rotation offsets kind of spins it. Not super important right now, but that could be important if you wanted to enable the half ring setting. So if we turn that on, there we go. I'm set to 180 degrees. So as you can see, we can spread this out and vary if we want to do a full 360 ring, or if we only want to have a partial, or if we want to start at 0 and just have a nice animation of it fanning out. Right? You can easily do something like that. So something like Marvel Rivals, for example, you would have, I don't know, maybe something like that, and then rotate this around to some kind of a selector like this, and then as your user scrolls, you're just gonna change the offset, the rotation offset. All right, so that'll give you an idea there. Also, something you could use it with is if you just used enough for the center ring, and if you had, depending on the amount, right, you'd only have maybe like 5 items, you could use this for like a hand spread. That's something you could use it for as well. So just some thoughts of what you can do to get this going. And then just for convenience, in case you wanted to start over for whatever reason, I gave you a clear all button, and that's just going to remove all of your items from inside your container. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and just add this texture rack back in, and the icon, and just add a bunch of items into our list. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll show you how we can make this with code. All right, so to start us off, I'm going to go ahead and close that scene, and if I open it back up, you can see this is how it's initially going to look. Obviously, because it's just a container node at its root or at its core, and we just have a bunch of texture Rex just kind of sitting in there. So obviously they're all going to be overlaid. They're on top of each other. That position 0, 0, right up in that top corner of the container. And that's obviously not what we want. We want this circle grid. So let's jump into the script and take a look at getting this set up for us. All right, so starting in, we need to set up the class. So for this, obviously this needs to be a tool script so it can work inside the editor. It's extending a container, not a container, and I'm giving it the class name of a circular grid container because that's what it is. It's working like a grid container, but it goes in a circle instead of vertical and horizontal. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, if you're unfamiliar with tool scripts, they do work in the editor, but in cases like this, if they're like part of a scene in that, you do need to close the scene and reopen it. So I'm just going to close it for now while we work on this. All right. So now we're going to need a few exports for what we did at the top, or for what we had in the inspector for our initial settings. So we have a rings export here, default set to 3. We have a set put in there, and obviously you have to pass in a value. And all we're doing is I'm setting the rings to a max number, and that number is either going to be 1 or the value. So you can have as many rings as you want, but you have to have at least 1 ring. Now, the update container we'll get to when we start doing our functions later. But let's go ahead and jump into the next variable we're going to use here. This is another export, of course. This is our ring spacing. And this is, as you saw in the example, the distance between each ring in pixels. And we're sure it's at least 10 pixels to prevent rings from overlapping too much. Now, of course, you could come in here and change this number if you wanted it to be 5. So you have a minimum of 5 pixels between. You could do that. But again, 10 is just the value I'm using here. And then, of course, we're using update container again. This is obviously going to be a common theme here. We can go ahead and move on down to our next data point, which is going to be start radius. And start radius is the innermost ring, so our first ring. And if you really want, you could set this to 0. That's why we have the option there. If you want items to start in the very center. Now, I've got it set as 50 by default, but if you really want it to be 0, you can. It's your choice. And the option is there for you. Our next export is going to be, whoops. Here we go. Our items per ring. And items per ring is how many items that we can place inside of that first ring. And remember, the outer rings automatically get more items based on their circumference. So naturally, remember, if we have 8 there by default, that would be 8 in the smallest ring. Then the next one would have 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and so on. And now we can go ahead, and the last one that we had here at the top is our export, is a range that we're exporting from 0 to 360. I'm doing it in a step of 0.1. I'm adding a suffix of degrees. That way it's clear to the user that's using it. Of course, I gave it a name of rotation offset degrees with a default of 0. Once again, we have a set. We've got a set on all of these. And I'm just setting rotation offset degrees is equal to value, which makes sense. You kind of need that, but then we're going to update container. Right, so we're doing this, so all this stuff happens automatically for us. So, and this is just going to rotate the entire object for us, for the most part, right? the entire arrangement that we're working with. Now we're going to get into a group, and this is what's going to give us our inspector section, collapsible section, and this is going to be our container settings. So before we start adding more data points first here, we got export group, container settings, and now anything below that is going to be within, it's going to be considered within the settings. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit as we go. So next up, auto size, Boolean, set it, update container. You see what we're doing here at this point. All right, so I'll just go ahead and add in the rest of everything that we're doing here. So after that, we have another group for the arc settings, half ring to Boolean, set the value, update container, exporting under the range of 0 to 360 for the angle. Angle will start at 180. Set the value, we're clamping the value between 0 and 360. Then we update the container. Then I'm exporting another group for editor tools, and this is going to be a button that I just labeled clear all children. It's a variable called clear all button. Of course, it has to be set to a callable, which is a function, and this is the name of the function, which we'll get to. Okay. So let's jump into these functions now for us. Whew. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, go into our ready function. All we're going to do is update our container. Now we have this update container function that we keep using inside all of our data at the top, and now even now inside of our ready function. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. What are we doing? Well, update container is going to call a function call that we'll have here called update minimum size. It's going to have a function of ours qsort. If auto size, and we're in the editor, right? So if we're telling it to automatically size the container for us, and we're in the editor, so if you don't want this to work in the editor, or if you want this to work in game as well to automatically size itself, you can just remove it. But I'm going to leave it so that it only works inside of the editor. And then we'll call reset size. Just add some spacing in there. So in this function, we're going to recalculate the container's minimum size, tell Godot to rearrange the children, and make sure that we're only doing this inside of the editor to avoid any potential weird issues that may happen in game. All right, next we're going to use the notification system that's part of Godot. So if we come in, we're looking for underscore notification that has a what, which is an integer. And this, anytime something happens, it's going to send, the engine sends out this notification. So all we need to do is just to match out what this what is, and when that what, right, comes back as notification sort children, then we're going to call our function arrange children. And containers in Godot use this notification for layout. So when Godot sends this notification, we match it, and we know it's time to reposition our children, which of course will happen inside of our arrange children function, which we will jump to now. That's going to be quite a large one here. So hopefully nobody gets too confused here. I'm going to go ahead and expand that just to give us a little more room. All right, so looking at it, this is where our magic is going to happen. We're going to create our function. First, we get all visible control children into an array. And we ignore any non-control nodes and any hidden children here. So if you want to hide children to make them appear later instead of adding them dynamically, you have that option. and this is only working with control nodes, so you cannot stick a 2D node inside of this container. Unless, of course, you modify the code in that for it here. Then if there's no children, then we're already done. So we're right here. So if we have no children, we exit early. Now, if the child index tracks with which child we're currently placing, a center is the container center point. Right? So what we're placing in our center point. All right, so here we are. So we have our set here. We're looking at the angle range. So tau is 2 pi, which is a full circle. So our full 360 degrees. So if we're using half rings, then we need to convert our arc angle from degrees into radians. And that's all we're doing here. So angle range is tau. If we're not using the half ring, else we convert degrees to radians, whatever our arc angle is set to. Right, so we're just converting it. Now for arranging the children, we need to iterate through each of our rings. And hopefully these comments are kind of keeping you on track as I talk here. We're going to loop through each ring, stopping once we've placed all of our children. Right, so we're going to iterate through. Calculate items to place. And we're going to continue looping through until we've placed all of them. We're calculating the ring's radius by adding our ring spacing for each ring going outward. Right, so that's our items in the ring up here. Our outer rings get more items. The first ring gets items per ring. The second gets twice as many. The third gets 3 times as many, and so on. As we go right down here, we're going to calculate how many items we can actually place inside this ring. We take the minimum of what the ring can hold and what's remaining. We then calculate the angle between each items, and we divide up the total angle range by the number of items. Right, so that's what we're getting here with the angle step. We can then move on to the third part of our function, which is the actual placing of items. So we're on our section here, placing items, and you can see we're almost done. Still a good chunk to explain here as we go through. So we need to get the current child that we're positioning, calculate the angle for this item, multiply the item by the index, or multiply the item index, by the angle step, and add our rotation offset. Okay, so that takes us right down here to the last bit. And this is the polar to Cartesian coordinate conversion. Just cosine angle, which gives us our x offset, sine angle gives us the y offset, and we multiply this by the radius and add to the center position. Oof. Get the child size and adjust the position to the child is centered in the calculated point, not the top left aligned. Sorry, I almost said aligned. And then we fit the child inside of the rect, which of course it's a method that already exists on the container itself. So it's a container method that positions and size the child. Finally increment our child's index right down here at the end, so we can go right back through our loop and do it again for the next item. Whew. All right, that was a lot. Hopefully you guys didn't get too confused or lost there. That was the biggest function that we're going to need, and with that we're actually almost done. Just have a small amount left. Right, so next up is going to be getting that minimum size function that we're doing automatically here. All right, so get minimum size is going to give us a return us a vector 2, of course. And first thing we do is we check if auto size is off, then just return 0. We don't need to set anything here, right? We don't need to change anything because the user doesn't want to automatically size this. They want to handle sizing themselves. Now, if we do have auto size enabled, meaning this comes back false, then we can begin doing our calculations. Right, so we're going to calculate the outermost ring's radius to find the largest child size, because of course we don't need the smaller rings, we just need to know what the largest area is going to be. And then the container needs to fit the outer ring plus the largest child size. So we return a square size. Right. No big deal. And that leads us to our couple of helper functions here, which are even smaller. Our first one here is going to be get total capacity. And all that's going to do is calculate how many items our current ring configuration can hold. And this can be useful for debugging or UI feedback. But it's just a simple helper that removes all children that is connected to our editor button. Oh, I'm sorry, I went on to the next one already. This one just calculates how many items are in our current ring configuration can hold, which is useful for debugging. And our UI interaction, clear all children. There's the function that we connected to our tool button up at the top, sorry. And this removes all the children. Sorry if that was a little confusing. But we can go ahead and save that. Go back to our 2D scene. Open that scene back up, and now we have all of our settings set. All right, so we have our auto size, we have our half ring, and everything is working fantastically. Right, our resize, if we set that on, boom, shrink that down. All right, cool. So to wrap it up, we have a fully functional circular grid. It's not too difficult. It's just mostly some math calculations on where to place everything for the most part. And it supports both full circles and arcs. And of course works in the editor, which is probably the most important for when you're using it for UI. But it's got a wide variety of uses. And I'm sure some of you could get creative out there and use it for some things that I wouldn't even think of. It's up to you at this point going forward, but that's it. Since it's a class that we defined, we could just add a new node and just go ahead and search in our circular grid container. There it is, add it in, and we're good to go. All right, I know I'm going to start rambling at this point, but that's it. So take care, have yourselves a good one, and I'll see you guys next week.